Ghosted my son so he'd attend his stepmom's event. Now his girlfriend says I hurt him and I'm feeling lost. I'm 40, and I love my son Avram, who's 21 now, more than I can ever describe. But the truth is, I never actually wanted to be a mom. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried, desperately, to get an abortion, but it was denied. I ended up becoming a mother anyway, and I've loved Avram fiercely, but I've always believed I never deserved him. Looking back, I know I was a terrible mom. I struggle with guilt and regret every day. I tell myself it was the untreated depression, that's what caused me to be so checked out and negligent, but I know deep down that doesn't excuse anything. I spent most of his early life not really being there the way a mother should be. When Avram was 10, his dad and stepmom stepped in and took him to live with them. They loved him so much, and more than anything, I am grateful for how they raised him. They turned him into the most amazing young man, smart, kind, thoughtful. He is the absolute best. I will always be thankful that they were there for him when I simply couldn't get it together. After Avram left, everything changed for me. I started to get therapy and treatment, and eventually spent a long time in inpatient care for my drinking. It was a dark time, but it saved my life in many ways. During those years, Avram kept reaching out. He wanted to see me. His dad gave me weekends, and I tried so hard to make those visits special, to finally be the kind of mom he deserved. I remember Avram, so compassionate even as a child, always telling me I didn't need to apologize. That I had been sick, not bad. That he loved living with me, and loved me for who I was. Even after everything. Since Avram turned 18, he's wanted to spend more and more time with me. I can't even explain the feeling, knowing I didn't deserve it while his stepmom, who was there and who cared for him when I couldn't, deserved all that love more than I did. Sometimes I want to step back and do the right thing, but I don't say anything, because being with me makes him happy. That's the only thing that matters. But this past Friday, something happened that's still turning over in my mind. His stepmom was hosting a big work dinner, and she wanted all her kids to be there, including Avram. But Avram still wanted to follow tradition and spend Friday with me, because that's what we always do. I felt this heaviness. It was clear to me that she's more his mom than I am. I knew he should be there for her, it was the right thing, and so, I did something I'm still unsure about. I pretended I wasn't home that day. I ghosted him, hoping he'd go to the dinner. Later, I saw on his girlfriend's Instagram story that he'd gone, and somehow, she realized what I'd done. She saw that I'd looked at her story and messaged me, calling me selfish for ghosting Avram like that and telling me how much I'd upset him. She didn't need to use the word, but it felt like she was calling me an asshole. Since then, Avram hasn't messaged me much. That silence is weighing on me more than anything. I still don't think I'm wrong. I was just trying to do what's best for Avram. I just wanted to show my gratitude for her, the woman who's done so much for him and truly deserves his love. But now I don't know if I've messed it all up anyway. Update 1. The first thing Avram did before I could even open my mouth was give me such a big, warm hug that I almost burst into tears right there, but I held myself together. I spoke to him about his stepmother's event, about why I genuinely felt he should go, and why I felt so deeply that I didn't deserve him. Everything I did wrong when he was a child, all the mistakes I made when he lived with me, came tumbling out. I confess that I didn't think I deserved his forgiveness. What took me completely by surprise was that Avram simply didn't see his childhood with me as nearly as bad as I feared. He said he mainly remembered happiness, and that the darker parts were only because I was sick, and he never blamed me for that. For a moment, I was stunned. These weren't things I'd forgotten, they were things I just hadn't valued, hadn't really considered. The tiny details came rushing back, the little Sunday shopping trips to Zeller's where I'd always let him pick a toy, the birthday cakes with a special message every year, the nights he hugged me to sleep even at age 10, right up until his dad took him away. How I'd miss work whenever he got sick just to be there for him. But the story that broke me was this. When Avram was 9, kids at school discovered we were ethnically Jewish and bullied him so badly he left before the Easter egg celebration, sobbing. So I went out and organized a whole Easter egg hunt just for him in the park. That memory meant everything to him. And that wasn't even all. He talked about dozens of moments like this that I barely remembered, but that obviously mattered to him. If I tried to write them all down, I could go on forever. It's so hard to let go of the constant guilt, to hold on to the good memories when I remember the yelling, the drinking, the smoking. But if Avram can focus on happiness, I owe it to him to do the same. I've let him steer our relationship, however he wants, and it's been the best thing for us. I see him much more often now. This Mother's Day, he and his girlfriend took me out to dinner and showered me with boxes of chocolates. I only eat those chocolates when they visit, so we can share them together. Even therapy is better. I managed to convince Avram to join me for a few sessions, and now he understands so much more about my struggles when I got pregnant, and about the respect I have for his stepmother. His girlfriend has even started coming to the gym with me. I love my son deeply. Avram is the best thing that ever happened to me. He is everything good in me, and by some miracle, he didn't inherit the bad. Sometimes I imagine, in another world, if I hadn't ended up so damaged, I would have turned out exactly like him. He's the source of all my pride and happiness, and I vow to never hurt him again, to never put myself before him. So thank you, to everyone who ever nudged me towards apologizing, to every mother who struggles. Please hug your sons tonight, no matter their age. Avram is 23 now. He's graduated, landed a fantastic job as an accountant, following in my footsteps. In September, he's marrying his fiancée. This last Mother's Day, both of them made me feel so honored. It was a wonderful night in my home. Yet ever since, thoughts have kept swirling in my mind, thoughts I can't shake. I'm 42 now, and sometimes it feels like I wasted my whole life, but my son is living the version I once dreamed for myself. When I got pregnant with Avram, I was alone in a foreign country, caught up in a wild religious phase with other teenagers. I was cut off from the option of abortion. Back then, I didn't want kids, never thought I would. After he was born, my life spiraled. I sank into depression, drank, smoked, tried drugs a few times, and obsessed over my body at the gym. Sometimes I'd find myself in bars just to feel attractive again. Eventually, I had to give up custody so I could go to inpatient treatment for drinking. It's now been 10 years since I last touched alcohol. Even after everything, Avram loves me unconditionally, and sometimes his love doesn't make sense to me. When I ask why, he recites all these good memories, most of which I barely remember anymore. The guilt at times is overwhelming. Sometimes, shamefully, I think that if I could travel back in time and choose differently, choose to have an abortion and never bring him into this world, I would. He's the greatest gift of my life, and still, I resent missing out on the life he now lives. My mind races. I never had that college experience because I had Avram. I never let myself be swept away into a fairy tale romance because I had him. I never built the steady, stable career I'd hoped for, or got to discover for sure if I actually wanted kids. But he has it all. He soared through university, swept his fiancée off her feet, and they're already hinting that I'll be a grandmother soon. Meanwhile, I am alone. No friends, just days at work, home, or at the gym. He's my only true family, the only one who loves me, yet sometimes I wish I had been able to live his life. Hugging Avram fills me with joy and pride, but the moment he leaves for his father's, I'm sick with regret again, feeling like I should have lived that life, not him. I shared all of this with my psychiatrist in our last session. We talked about it, but the details become hazy in my mind now, and sometimes I can't remember why things are so hard to recall these days. It's confusing and painful, and I don't really know if these feelings are wrong. Am I supposed to feel this way? Does any of it make sense? Almost 44 now, I try to remind myself not to let these thoughts haunt me. After all, life has tossed disappointment my way before. But this feels different, because I love Avram so much. Nearly 2 years ago, I met my current boyfriend. He was part of the catering staff at Avram's wedding, and he's 12 years younger than me. He tried his best cheesy rom-com pickup lines at me, and I'll never forget how genuinely shocked he was to learn I was the groom's mother. But he charmed me, and for the first time in my adult life, after we started dating, I truly fell in love. We fit perfectly together, loving the gym, neither of us wanting children, and we both carry our unique histories and hopes. With him, I am starting to carve out a new version of my life, a life with love and hope, perhaps not the one I dreamed about as a teenager, but a real, honest one. We loved the same food, shared so many of the same weird little quirks, and it felt like fate that both of us had lived lives untouched by alcohol or drugs, though for me that came after years of struggle and sobriety. His family embraced me immediately, his mother especially. It was like suddenly having a mom again, that comforting maternal warmth I hadn't felt in so long. As the weeks went by, my memories started clearing up, shining light into corners I thought were closed forever. My psychologist was thrilled every session, telling me how much I'd improved, how proud she was of how far I'd come. It all felt like a dream that I never wanted to end. Just 2 weeks ago, we sat down together, making real plans to move in with each other, and even talked about getting married one day. My heart would skip, imagining that future together, but then everything spun out of control. 2 days ago, my son and his wife sat me down, glowing with happiness, and told me I was going to be a grandmother. My daughter-in-law handed me a soft sweater she'd knit herself, bright and cozy, stitched with the words "First Time Grandma." The look on my son's face, I don't think I've ever seen him so happy, and honestly, I don't think I'd ever felt that happy either. I could barely contain my joy. I hugged them both, overwhelmed at the new life blossoming in our family. Of course, I had to tell my boyfriend. He smiled and said he was happy for me too, but something in his eyes felt distant. When we met for dinner yesterday, he arrived with tears tracing down his cheeks. His words tumbled out, shaking and raw. He couldn't see himself as a grandfather, not at his age, not even 35 yet. He said maybe it would be better for both of us to break up. I sat there stunned as he cried. Why was he crying, when it felt like he was tearing my heart out? He wouldn't even be the grandfather, really. The baby would call him by his name or uncle or anything else that made sense. I couldn't believe something so small could send our whole world crashing apart. Since that night, I haven't stopped crying. The pain feels deeper than I've ever felt before, thick and suffocating. I can barely stand the idea of facing my son, not wanting him or his wife to see me in this gutted state. I keep thinking I should be the one supporting them, the new parents, not the other way around. Yet here I am, lost, doubting everything about myself, feeling more wrong than ever. Update 2. I spent most of yesterday with my face buried in the sweater they gave me, the yellow one with "First Time Grandma" stitched across the front, pressing the knit to my mouth like it could soak up the crying before it fell out of me. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't go to the gym. I just lay there in the quiet and let my brain go to the worst places until the doorbell rang 3 times in that pattern Avram made up when he was a kid. I opened it, puffy-eyed and red-nosed, and he was standing there with a paper bag that smelled like tomato soup and rosemary bread. He didn't ask to come in. He walked in like he always has a place here, because he does, set the bag down, and wrapped me up without saying anything. It was the kind of hug that interrupts your heartbeat and puts it back together. I told him what happened. I didn't soften it. I didn't try to be brave, which is new for me, because I've spent so long trying to protect him from my sadness that sometimes I accidentally gift trap it and call it fine. He listened with that focused tilt of his head and steady eye contact that still makes me want to curl into his shoulder like I'm small. When I finished, he sat quiet for a full minute. Then he said, "Mom, you don't ever have to pretend you're not human for me. I want you, mess and all." He pushed the soup toward me, like if I could just get something warm into me I'd stop shaking. "Come to the first ultrasound next week," he said. "Sit in the room with us. Hold her hand with me. Please." I said yes. My voice sounded like gravel, but I said yes. I kept thinking about calling my boyfriend, about telling him we could work it out. He doesn't have to be anything he doesn't want to be. Every time my thumb hovered over his name my stomach clenched. Instead, I texted his mother. She answered immediately, asked if I could meet her at the tiny Portuguese bakery near her house, the one with a glass case of pastel de nata and a bell that rings when you open the door. When I got there, she already had 2 coffees on the table and a napkin bunched between her fingers like she'd been waiting, nervous. She took one look at me and did that mother thing, thumb under my eye, smoothing my hair behind my ear. "He is not himself right now," she said, and I felt a little piece of me exhale because she said right now, like it was a storm, not the whole climate. We talked for a long time. She told me something I didn't know. When he was 19, his younger sister had a baby. There wasn't much help. He went to night school and did the morning bottles and rushed from class to pick up a baby with a fever. He bought car seats and changed brands of formula and learned how to bounce a colicky infant on a yoga ball at 3 in the morning. He lost friends who didn't understand why he couldn't go out, why he was tired all the time. People would call him little dad on the bus, she said, eyes shining, and he'd laugh, but it ate him. She squeezed the napkin until it tore. He promised himself he would never again be the one who grew up overnight because someone else needed him too. Grandfather landed like a trapdoor opening under his feet. There are whole countries and people you love that you think you visited just because you know how they take their coffee. I didn't know this part of him. I went home and left him a voice message, my voice shaking but clear. I told him he wasn't wrong for feeling what he felt. I told him I didn't want a grandfather, I wanted him. I said he could be just his name to the baby, or nothing at all if that's what he needed, and that my heart wasn't a courtroom where we had to argue terms. I said I was going to the ultrasound next week, and if he wanted to sit in the lobby and hold a coffee with his hands shaking and then walk me to the bus after, I would be grateful. I hit send and set the phone face down like it was a hot pan. The morning of the ultrasound, I ironed the yellow sweater and then stared at it for 10 minutes, not sure if it was too much. I wore it anyway. On the subway, a woman smiled at me and nodded at the words, and I smiled back without saying sorry for taking up space I've been trying to shrink out of since I was 20. In the waiting room, the air smelled like hand sanitizer and lemon cleaner. My daughter-in-law's hands were cold and small inside mine. When the technician found the heartbeat, the room filled with the sound of a fast, watery drum, and something inside me went still for the first time in days. I don't know how to write what it did to me. It felt like the universe tapping back. I looked at my son and his eyes were wet, wide. He kissed the back of his wife's hand and then reached out for me, and the 3 of us sat there being quiet and very alive together. When we came out, he was there. Leaning against the wall by the potted plant with a coffee he'd clearly forgotten to drink, wearing the blue hoodie I sleep in when I miss him. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear. He looked at me and swallowed hard and all I could think was, my God, we are all such fragile animals pretending to be architecture. He asked if he could walk me to the corner. We stood outside while traffic hissed. He said the word sorry like it had been living in his mouth all week. He told me about the yoga ball at 3 a.m., about smelling like formula in lectures, about teachers calling him responsible like it was a compliment and a sentence. He said, I felt that word like a weight, and I understood. I don't want to be old, he whispered, and I heard the boy in him who never got to be a boy. I told him I didn't want to make him old. I told him I had gotten good at loving a thing without naming it when I got sober, how I had to sit with thirst and call it by its real name. If you need to be just you around my family, that's fine, I said. If you need to sit out of baby showers and knitted booties and call yourself my boyfriend and nothing else forever, that's fine too. His mouth trembled. He took my hands. I love you, he said. I panicked. I nodded. We stood there until my bus came. He didn't promise anything huge. He didn't fix it with a speech. He just climbed on with me, sat next to me, and rested his thigh against mine all the way home, soft pressure that felt like a bridge. 2 nights later, Avram's stepmother invited all of us to dinner to celebrate the ultrasound and pretend like we weren't all doing mental math about weeks and months. I almost said no. I was scared of crying at the table, but I went. She had made roast chicken with lemon and capers, and I helped her in the kitchen slice carrots on a slight diagonal the way she does. We moved around each other like we'd rehearsed it. At one point she said quietly, "I kept something for you," and handed me a small photo album with a fabric cover. Inside were school pictures I'd never seen, missing front teeth, a sweater I don't remember buying, a shot of him asleep in the car seat with a hand still gripping a balloon string. At the back there was a photo of that park where we did our own Easter egg hunt. She'd written the date in the corner. I put my hand over my mouth because I didn't trust my face not to break. "We've always been on the same side," she said. I nodded, and that old fist of guilt that has been living under my ribs for more than 20 years loosened a finger. We were laughing about baby names when my daughter-in-law winced and put a hand to her belly. It was small at first, just a twist of her mouth, and then she went gray around the edges. Avram was on his feet before the chair stopped scraping. We ended up at the hospital under those unforgiving lights that make everyone look like they haven't slept in a year. I kept thinking, don't be dramatic, don't make this about you, don't fall apart, and then I looked at my son's face and remembered he had asked me to be human. I held her purse and recited our street addresses to the nurse and fetched ice chips and said her name over and over like a prayer. It turned out to be okay, just the kind of scare that steals hours off your life while giving none to anyone. We all walked out with discharge papers and a heightened sense of the perishable. He met us at the hospital doors with a plastic bag of lemon popsicles and those cheap socks with little rubber dots on the bottom. For after, he said, like he'd known we would need the small mercy of sugar and something to hold on to. He didn't come inside. He sat on the curb and passed out popsicles one by one like communion. When I finally sat down next to him, he nudged his shoulder against mine once and said, "I can do this if I can do it like this." On the outside of the frame. Not in the caption. I laughed for the first time in a week. "You can do it however you need," I said. He laced his fingers with mine under the edge of the plastic bag where no one could see, and I realized that in my worst moments I always think love is an exam and what it keeps being is a room we can leave the light on in. On the way home, I pulled the yellow sweater tighter around me and it occurred to me that I was not, in fact, being punished by joy. I was allowed to have it, even wearing it like a billboard. I am going to be a grandmother. The baby's heartbeat sounded like hope on a tiny drum. My son asked me to sit beside him and I did. A man who loves me cried and then told me the truth and then showed up with popsicles. I got handed a book of pictures I'd been missing for years. My living room smelled faintly of tomato soup and gossip from the women in my life who are not related to me by blood and who keep handing me napkins and permission. I took the sweater off when I got home and laid it over the back of my chair. I put the ultrasound photo on my fridge with the pizza magnet Avram made in 3rd grade out of a bottle cap and glue. I texted my boyfriend, "I'll be at the gym at 6 tomorrow. If you want to spot me, I want you to." He answered with a picture of his running shoes and a heart. And for the first time since they told me, I fell asleep without crying. When I woke up, the sun had found a strip of my bedroom floor and was laying across it like a lazy cat. I stepped into it and it felt like stepping into a life that is mine, finally, and somehow big enough for all of this. Update 3. He was waiting outside the gym when I got there at 6, already warm from his run, hoodie dark at the collar. The automatic doors coughed us into that lemon and rubber smell that only exists in places where people count to 12 and then again. We didn't do a big reunion. He handed me my water bottle like we hadn't missed a beat and said, "Bench?" And I said, "Bench." He spotted me in that quiet, humming way he has, fingers under the bar, breath syncing with mine. On the last set he said softly, "I don't want to be anybody's word. But I want to be here on Tuesdays." It landed in me like a chair being pulled out. I racked the bar. "Okay," I said. "Tuesdays." After, we went to the diner that smells like bacon even when you order fruit. He drew circles with his finger in a coffee ring on the table and told me he'd bought a yoga ball. He said it like a confession and a joke at the same time. "It's just a ball," he said, shrugging. "If your back hurts, if she needs it. If not, it's a ball." I could feel something unclench in my spine. We talked about apartment keys and decided not to be brave about it yet. He kept one. I kept one. The rest of the courage we can earn in small coins. I didn't expect the thing that would undo me that week to be a mug. Avram texted that afternoon asking if I could come meet them after work at the little shop with the hand-thrown cups that looked like they were pinched into existence by someone thinking about rain. When I walked in, there was a row of white mugs, and he put one in my hands. On the side in a deep, imperfect blue it said Savta. He said the word like he was rolling a pearl on his tongue to make sure it was real. "I thought maybe," he said, "we could use the Hebrew. It always belonged to you." He looked odd and shy in a way I only ever see on him when he does math without paper, like he's letting me into an unguarded room. I didn't even know I'd been bracing for grandmother or nana or whatever until that familiar syllable hit me square in the chest. Savta. It dropped a straight line through the scattered map of me and lit up places I hadn't stood in since we left Montreal and Zellers stopped existing and Sunday mornings meant holla. I put the mug to my lips and didn't drink, just breathed in glazed clay like it was air I'd been rationing. "Okay," I said. "Savta." The anatomy scan was the following week. We decided not to do a party. No cake that bleeds color. Just folded paper and a single envelope in my tiny kitchen that still looks like it belongs to someone more careful with measuring spoons. After the appointment, Avram handed me the envelope like he was 6 again, snotty and ecstatic with a birthday card he'd tugged out of the mailbox. "You, please, he said, and everybody else nodded like I'd just been sworn in. I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was one sheet with the word written neatly in the technician's block letters, and I felt stupidly protective of the handwriting of a stranger. I said it out loud. It felt like introducing a song. The room changed. We all laughed that wet laugh that is mostly relief and a little terror. He pressed his forehead to mine the way he did when he was too big to sit in my lap but not big enough to stop trying. We ate strawberries with our fingers and stained the corner of my yellow sweater, and I didn't scrub it because it felt like a record, not a mess. I finally told my doctor about my memory ladder missing rungs. I was expecting the full orchestra of doom, and instead she took one look at my blood work and said, "You are a B12 desert." She said it so cheerfully I almost forgave the part of me that jumps to apocalypse. There was a shot and a sting and a hot bloom under my skin, and then, 2 days later, I stood up in the morning and it was like someone had taken Windex to the inside of my head. I could pull words down without knocking over furniture. The fog that's lived under my eyebrows for months thinned enough to see shapes. My therapist clapped. I texted Avram that my brain had come back from vacation. He sent 10 party hats and the pizza magnet emoji, which doesn't exist, but he made it happen with confetti and a slice and a gear. I put the lab results on my fridge next to the ultrasound picture like report cards from 2 different schools, and for once didn't feel like I was failing both. On Sunday, his mother hosted lunch and made those little stuffed peppers she does that taste like a family cookbook. My boyfriend came, nervous in a way I haven't seen since he knocked into me with a tray of sliders and said, "Your eyes are like 2 cappuccinos," and I laughed so hard I almost cried into a napkin. His sister was there, and her kid, the one he used to carry on his shoulder while his homework printed. He's taller than both of us now, voice half broken in that endearing, unreliable way, loop earring flashing. He walked in, threw himself at my boyfriend, and said, "LD." With all the affection in the world. The table went very quiet for half a heartbeat, like everybody was watching a glass wobble on the edge. My boyfriend smiled. "A real one. It's Marco," he said, easy, and kissed the top of the boy's head. I retired the other thing. The kid's face went red and he mumbled, "Sorry," and then, because children know when to thread the needle, added, "Uncle Marco sounds cooler anyway," which is the truest sentence that has ever been said in that kitchen. Something seismic and boring and necessary shifted in the tile and grout of the afternoon. Later, on the balcony, he told me he hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying the nickname like a rusted key in his pocket. "I don't want to open that door anymore," he said. We watched 2 pigeons argue on a wire and decided out loud that he would be only Marco to our baby, and that he would come with me to birth class and hold my bag and make jokes under his breath and leave when he needed to without an apology. "I can hold a line," he said, and I loved him in a new way for saying it like he was measuring twice. Birthing class was in a church basement that smelled like crayon and damp hymnals. The instructor had a ponytail that did not move, even when she demonstrated breathing like a train leaving a station. We all failed our first swaddle spectacularly. The doll slipped out the bottom like a burrito running for its life, and my daughter-in-law laughed so hard her eyes disappeared into parentheses. At one point the instructor said, "Grandparents can be a calm harbor," and I looked down at the safety mug I was using to hold my pens and had this flash of myself as a little harbor with yellow tugboats and tiny lighthouses I could turn on and off as needed. It felt less like a job and more like a weather system I could learn to read. My boyfriend sat 3 rows back, knees splayed, forearms on thighs, listening like it mattered and rolling a yoga ball under his sneakers with his foot like it was a new planet. There was a baby shower in our future that I was dreading because of balloons and expectations, so we turned it into a Sunday afternoon where all the mothers in my life came over and we cut fruit and taped paper lanterns to the ceiling and tried not to make anything match. Halfway through, the arch that was not an arch deflated with a long whoopee cushion sigh and dropped bath of confetti into the punch. Everyone laughed like it was choreographed. Avram fished out a yellow circle with a slotted spoon, held it up to the light like a coin, and said, "Prosperity." His stepmother handed me a recipe card for lemon cake in her block handwriting, and his grandmother by-law passed me a needle and thread to show me how to hem the receiving blankets in a way that holds. Between the 4 of us, the house turned into a place where people knew where the extra tape lived. I went to bed with a strip of glitter on my wrist and didn't bother to peel it off. There was one more small wild moment that keeps replaying in my head. We were on the bus, me with my yellow sweater in my bag because the day couldn't make up its mind, when my phone went off with that recorded heartbeat from the ultrasound because I had set it as my ringtone like a ridiculous person. The sound filled the aisle, fast and watery, and for a breath it felt like the whole city turned their heads toward the same drum. A teenager with chipped black nail polish smiled at me, the exact smile I used to pretend I didn't see in mirrors. An old man in a cap tipped it. My boyfriend was next to me, hand easy on my knee. We were all strangers and also not, hooked to the same pulsing thread that says stay, stay, stay. I picked up. "Safeta," Avram said, trying it on in a sentence and breaking me in half with it. "Can you come by after work? She's craving tomato soup." I stopped at the store and bought too many tomatoes and not enough onions and added rosemary because apparently that's my love language now. When I put the bowl in front of her, she pressed her hands together like a child in a painting and said, "I love you," and I realized that the guilt I've been wearing like a shirt under every outfit had loosened its collar another notch without permission. I stood in the kitchen with my son, steam curling the pages of the lemon cake recipe on the counter, and he leaned into me the way he always has, using me like a piece of furniture he can trust. "Mom," he said. Just that. And the whole electric city of my life went bright. The yoga ball arrived the next day, huge and ridiculous in its blue plastic pouch. He inflated it in my living room and we took turns sitting on it and laughing because both of us looked like we were riding the world's slowest horse. It rolled into a corner eventually, next to the bag with the lemon popsicles because he keeps buying them like talismans. The mug says Safeta. The sweater has a strawberry crescent on it I'm not going to try to scrub out. The pizza magnet still holds up the tiny alien in profile. My hands smell like rosemary most nights. I am not being punished by joy, I am, astonishingly, being trusted with it. I keep leaving the hall light on. Just in case someone needs to find their way back in the dark. Update 4. Labor announced itself in the produce section. She was standing there very seriously comparing 2 bunches of cilantro like they might confess a secret if she stared hard enough, and then she blinked, put the herbs down, and said quietly, "I think my water just." And then it very much did. Avram looked at the floor like it had betrayed him and then at her like she'd hung the moon and then at me like I was the moon's manager. I pulled the yellow sweater out of my bag and tied it around my waist because that felt like the kind of ridiculous useful thing a Safeta does when the universe clears its throat. On the way to the hospital, the city looked like it had tipped forward a degree. Every light turned green just before we reached it, like somebody up there finally agreed to go easy on us. I called Marco. He answered on the first ring, already out of breath. "I'm grabbing the ball," he said, like we were playing some normal game and not this one where you come out the other side with the whole person. I don't know why that sentence steadied me, but it did, the idea of him under one arm with a planet and a bag of lemon popsicles bruising his knuckles. The triage nurse wore sneakers with sunflowers on them. She was brisk in a kind way that made me love her on sight. "Grandma?" she asked, and I nodded so hard my neck clicked. I wanted to tell her it was safe to now, that it mattered, that the syllables felt like a bridge lowered from a place I'd thought I'd never get to again, but I just kept it in my chest and it burned pleasantly, like a sip of tea you don't blow on first. We were put in a room where the blinds made the light into stripes and the clock told time in a language I felt fluent in for once. The yoga ball squeaked its comic little squeak and the heart rate monitor drew mountains on the screen like the baby was hiking out to us. When the first real contraction hit, she gripped my hand and I did not be brave. I made the small, helpless sound humans make when their child hurts. Avram pressed his forehead to mine in that old move of ours, and between the two of us we made a triangle around her. The nurse smiled at our geometry. "That's good," she said. "Keep being exactly like that." There was a scary minute. Her face went gray around the edges and the baby's heartbeat did a fast, confusing stutter that turned my bones to smoke. The nurse leaned her whole attention at the machine like she could will steadiness into it. A doctor arrived with the hairline seriousness of someone who has met nights like this before. They changed her position. Marco, who had been pacing politely in the hall like a dog with a job, came in when the nurse waved and held the fourth pole like it was the mast of a ship, eyes on, nothing but her mouth, waiting for the corners to climb back. The sound evened. The room exhaled. I realized I'd been praying under my breath in Hebrew I haven't sung out loud since I was a teenager, half lullaby, half plea, the tune my grandmother hummed when she braided challah. I didn't stop. The hours did that accordion thing they do in hospitals, stretching and snapping back. I fed her ice chips like they were pearls and she was rare enough to deserve them. Avram counted breaths on his fingers and then ran out of fingers and started over. At some point someone asked who would cut the cord and my son looked at me with the same expression he used to reserve for "Can we build the blanket fort even though it's bedtime?" I opened my mouth to say he should, that it should be him, and what came out was, "If you want me to, I will." He nodded once, like a gavel had gently fallen. The nurse kept calling Marco Granddad by accident in that well-meaning way that people do when the world looks tidy from their vantage point. The first time, he flinched. The second time, he said, "It's Marco," soft and perfectly even, and she corrected course without apology or fuss. He smiled afterward, the good one that lifts his right cheek first, like it had cost him exactly the right amount. He handed me a popsicle with his other hand under the fluorescent hum and I thought, this is what a held line looks like in the wild. When it was time, it was time. The doctor said, "Okay, Mama," and I didn't know if she meant my daughter-in-law or me or all of us. Pushing is not delicate. It is making and unmaking in the same minute, it is the opposite of polite. I braced one of her feet against my hip and Avram took the other and the sound that came out of her throat was the sound of doors. You only open once. The head was there and then it was more there and then suddenly a whole face existed where a minute ago there had been secrecy. For a split second the baby was underwater and then she wasn't. The crying started like paper tearing and swelled into a little siren that made the hair lift on my arms. I cut the cord with hands that have done worse and better things. The scissors didn't feel like scissors, they felt like a key. She slid onto her mother's chest small as a house sparrow, furious and utterly satisfied, vernix in her hair like a crown someone forgot to polish. Avram made a sound I have never heard him make. It shook me right down to the part of me that still daydreams at bus windows. He kissed her, first his wife, then his daughter, like he was inventing both acts. "Hi," he said, breathless and devastatingly tender. "Hi, little light." We had not discussed the name in front of me. They had guarded it in envelopes and glances in the backseat of cars. He looked up at me now like we were in on a tiny heist. Safeta, he said, and there it was again, the soft weight of that word landing exactly where it belongs. We want to call her Leora. He said it carefully, like he was placing a candle under a glass so the wind wouldn't get it. My throat did something unmedical. Leora. My light. I nodded, because I could not be trusted with verbs. In some other part of the hospital someone's blood pressure cuff let go and hissed like applause. They measured her, plenty. They weighed her, enough. She clenched my finger with that vice newborns of like she was trying me on to see if I would fit. I passed whatever test it was because she sighed in that total body way that is the first true poem anybody ever writes. My sweater was damp at the shoulder with somebody's something and I didn't mind. I am keeping every stain from this year like letters I'll want to read again. We slept in chairs. You don't really sleep, but the body forgives you for trying. At dawn the hallway turned pink and the cleaning cart squeaked past like an apologetic animal. Avram crept out to the vending machines in socks and came back with pretzels and a look like he'd seen a new color. We watched his wife breathe in tandem with the baby and the monitor draw its mountains. Mom, he whispered, because whispering is required in those rooms by a law older than any posted sign. That was the whole sentence. It filled everything in me with warm, uncomplicated electricity. Her stepmother came in with a hat she had knit in the hour between midnight and whatever came next. It was yellow. Of course it was. She handed it to me to put on Leora's head and we both did the kind of cry you can still do things through. Later, when the room filled with family in the configuration I thought I had ruined forever, a father and a stepmother and a son and a daughter-in-law and me and the man I love who was not any particular title and absolutely himself, the nurse asked if we wanted a group picture. We made a frame where Marco stood just outside and took the photo exactly how he likes it, not in the caption, in the architecture. He slipped in afterward and touched the baby's foot with one finger and grinned at me like a secret we're allowed to keep. She was born on a Tuesday. It felt like the kind of joke the universe tells kindly. On the way home, after we'd left them dozing in their little hospital diorama of newness, Marco said, "Tuesdays," under his breath, and I reached over in the cab and put my hand on the back of his neck and found it very warm and very human. We didn't talk about moving in. We didn't talk about rings. We said, "Tuesdays," once more like a vow and left the rest to ripen. The naming was a week later in a living room that suddenly had more lamps. We didn't do it in a synagogue because we didn't need to in order for the words to be real. We covered the coffee table in a white cloth and put a vase of lemon branches that looked like rented sunshine. We spoke Leora's name the way you introduce a guest you have secretly loved for years. We named her for my grandmother Leah, who taught me to braid bread and refuse meanness even for myself, and for the light that keeps finding its way through blinds and bus windows and the spaces between my fingers when I thought I was closed. Avram held the baby while I said the blessing I hadn't known I still knew, and his stepmother stood right next to me like we were a braid with 4 strands and no loose ends. Marco strung tiny fairy lights along the bookshelf and they hummed like a second heartbeat. For once I didn't apologize for how many times in 1 minute I cried. There was tomato soup afterward because apparently we have made that a family sacrament. I tore rosemary with my fingers and the scent got under my nails and I did not mind taking it to bed with me later, the way you do when you have been in a place you want to carry into your dreams. Leora slept with her mouth open like she had something to say but decided against it at the last second. Every time she startled, her hands flew up like she was doing a magic trick badly. She is perfect at it. My Safeta mug chipped that week because I knocked it against the sink in my lopsided joy. The crack caught the light like a small river. I thought about throwing it out and then didn't. I colored the seam with a gold marker until it looked like it had done this on purpose. It sits on my counter now like a lesson. There are breaks you can make beautiful if you are shameless about the glue. A strange small grace, she took her first huge, hiccuping laugh in my arms. It wasn't really a laugh, the way newborns don't really do anything except their job of being here, but it sounded like the beginning of one. It rattled my ribs. I had spent so long rehearsing for sorrow that I almost didn't recognize the cue for this other scene. There, I whispered into the downy whirl of her head. There you are. On the streetcar home that night, my phone did the watery drum of the ultrasound because I still haven't changed the ringtone and maybe never will. People glanced and then looked back at their books and ghosts. My city is kind like that in public. Marco pressed his knee into mine and I pressed back. We passed a storefront that used to be a Zeller's, back when they still made my Sunday mornings smell like plastic and sugared hope. In the dark glass I could see us for a second, my sweater with its strawberry crescent, his hand on the yoga ball we'd started storing like a ridiculous guest chair in the corner of my living room, the outline of a stroller in the far-off future like the faintest pencil line. At home I did a very domestic, very quiet thing that felt holy. I took the tiny hat off Leora's head hours after we'd left her and put it next to the pizza magnet on my fridge like they were part of the same family, and of course they were. I left the hall light on. Not because anyone needed to find their way in the dark just then, but because there is a new person on the planet who will someday, on a Tuesday, maybe, forget her keys or her courage, and I want the future to know we are a house that keeps a light waiting.